These are the character building techniques that you absolutely need to use in your current book or in your next book, and I'm pretty sure that you probably haven't heard of these before, so let's go. The first technique is laugh in the face of cannibals. So the best way to create a really memorable character is simply by having them react to events in very counterintuitive ways. Now, the reason for this is because if your character acts like everyone else would act, like a tragedy happens and they react in a very predictable way, then there's nothing about their personality or character which is being developed. We just understand like, oh, they're human. No, your goal is to give them a reaction to events that makes the reader feel like they know this character, like, oh wow, that's how you react in that situation? Huh, okay. So you might know David Benioff's name because he wrote the script for Game of Thrones. But what most people don't know is that he also had a few novels, one of which is called City of Thieves. And in City of Thieves, we have two soldiers who are sent on this like crazy mission to try to find eggs in World War II when everyone's starving and nobody has eggs. And during their journey to try to find eggs, they encounter cannibals. They manage to fend off the cannibals and escape with their lives. And right after, as they are running away, one of the characters laughs. Who laughs at that? I don't know about you, but if cannibals are trying to eat me, I would not be guffawing on my way out of the room. But that laughter in the face of hardship perfectly encapsulates Koya's character. And that detail, along with many others in the book, is what makes him one of my favorite characters that I've ever read. I also think that counterintuitive responses to real events mirrors what people do in real life. We don't always act the way that we're supposed to, right? I mean, people laugh at funerals all the time. Another advantage of using this technique is that you avoid cliche. If every single character acts exactly the way they're supposed to act in a typical manner, then they're too stereotypical, right? But there are some risks with this technique, and I would say one would be overuse, right? You don't want to use this for every single situation. Use it sparingly, just when it feels right. And the other thing is that it does need to be believable still. This can't be like a weird reaction out of nowhere. It has to tell us something about who this character is. If it's coming from their personality, their authentic personality, then that's believable. The second character building technique is make your character carry something. So I want you to look at your character's possessions, specifically ones that they would carry with them. Look in their purse, look in their glove compartment, look in their wallet, look in their pockets.
What has it got in its pockets?
What objects do you find? Because all characters have possessions, right? And a character's possessions say something very important about them. I think that these objects reveal things about these characters that it's really difficult to get in any other way. In Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, Anton Chigurh carries a coin everywhere. And he uses this coin because he flips it when he wants to determine by luck or chance or something whether someone's gonna die or whether they're gonna live. Essentially, whether he's gonna kill them. I mean, a coin is such an innocuous symbol, but the way that he uses the coin tells you like this is a dangerous psychopathic killer. In the movie Memento, Leonard Shelby, played by Guy Pearce, carries around Polaroids everywhere. And this is, if you remember the movie, because his memory is failing him. And so these Polaroids are supposed to help him remember like, oh, this is your past. And so those visual mnemonics are something that tells you something very important about this character. You can also move beyond mere physical objects and move into objects that characters carry that are more metaphorical or symbolical. Take this example from Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. I mean, it's right there in the title, right? Which is a masterclass in characterization through objects. And so in it, O'Brien's characterizing a whole squad of American soldiers by the objects that they carry. Michelle Sanders, the RTO, carried condoms. Norman Bauer carried a diary. Rat Kiley carried comic books. Kiowa, a devoted Baptist, carried an illustrated New Testament that had been presented to him by his father, and also carried his grandmother's distrust of the white man. Okay, so there we have some great objects that distinguish characters from one another. Obviously, a character who's carrying condoms is very different than a man carrying a Bible. But I like that this paragraph ends on something which is not an object, but more symbolic, like he is carrying distrust of the white man. Oh, that's a weighty thing to carry. A third character building technique that you need to be using is contradictory characters. Contradictory characters are just some surprising element that you wouldn't be able to guess based on the stereotype or like a one-sentence description of the character. So let's go through a couple examples here. For instance, say a billionaire whose wife still cuts his hair. I mean, you can buy the best barber in the universe, but somehow there's some sort of intimacy maybe that he's still looking for with his spouse. Or say a leader of a motorcycle gang who likes true crochet. That would be be the last hobby you would expect, right? Now, you do have to make it believable, right? But adding some sort of contradictory element to their persona means that they're not just like the stereotypical, oh, tough dude, but there's some other element that's surprising. Or say a lecherous grandma with a foul mouth, right? You don't quite see it coming. You see her and think she's just gonna be some like nice doddering old lady, and then she says something and you're way taken aback. So here's the assignment for you, is to take your character and figure out one thing which is against type. There are two good reasons to do this, right? One is that it creates a mystery. The reader wants to figure out, how do these contradictory elements in this person resolve? Like, do I really believe this is a real character? I want to see how this plays out. And the second thing is it helps you to avoid stereotypes. It makes the person into a person rather than into a character. You might know Walter Mosley because he wrote one of the most famous private investigators of all time, Easy Rawlings. But he also wrote this really fun book called Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, which is such a fantastic title. In that book, there's this guy called Socrates Fortlow, and he's this ex-con. He murdered people in the past. He spent a lot of time in prison. He's finally sprung from prison, and he's just this sort of hard-bitten character. So Walter Mosley takes that persona, and then he adds contradictory elements. Socrates Fortlow is also a philosopher. I mean, the first name should have tipped you off, right? He's a very contemplative person. He's a very thoughtful person. And in the end, he ends up being a peacemaker. If you're enjoying this idea of character contradictions and want to go a little deeper in character building, check out my course, The Triangle Method of Character Creation. It was my very first course that I ever made, so it's a little weird, it's a little odd, it's animated for one, but I think all the content is really, really good for how to go deeper with a character. And of course, I also give great advice about how to build characters in my novel course on Bookfox Academy, so check that out. The fourth character building technique is 3 things that you should do every time you introduce a new character. So every time you introduce a new character, there's a challenge, right? You have to make sure the reader feels like they know this person as quickly as possible. So here are the 3 things that you should do to help that process along. The first thing you want to do is have your character say something. Why? Because the things that come out of a character's mouth help the reader get to know a character almost faster than anything else. I mean, this is something that we talked about in my other video, the 6 levels of dialogue that every writer must master. So for example, let's look at Sherlock Holmes and the very first thing that he ever says to Watson, which is in A Study in Scarlet. They meet and Holmes says, "You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." So the very first thing out of his mouth is a deduction. How does he know that this man has been in Afghanistan? Oh, Holmes, you're acting so Holmesian. It tells you something about the character right away. Second thing you should do is have your character do something. Characters are defined by actions, right? What they think defines them, yes. What they say absolutely defines them, yes. But what they do really defines them. When we first meet Arthur Dent of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he goes out and lays in front of a bulldozer, which is trying to bulldoze his home. I love that, right? Like, he's the type of guy that says, yeah, you want to take down my house? You got to take me down first. And it doesn't have to be a big action, right? It can be a small action, but having your character do something lets the reader know, oh, this is the type of person this is. And the last thing you should do when you introduce a new character is show what this character's problem is. I think the natural default for writers is, oh, I'll get to the problem in a little bit, right? Let me start by talking about hair color and eye color and other, like, you know, basic stuff. But I would recommend letting us know what this character struggles with as soon as possible, like in the first scene we meet them. A character with a problem is human. A character without a problem is false, just a fictional creation. So look at John Green's The Fault in Our Stars. We learn on the first page that Hazel is dying and she has cancer. Yeah, that's a problem. Green doesn't delay. He doesn't tell us at the end of the first chapter. He starts with that information. So the goal is to give an immediate sense of who this character is. And if you do those 3 things, you have a great chance of succeeding in making the reader feel attached to your character. Now, I will say, if you're resistant to this idea and you're like, I'm not going to do those 3 things right off the bat, who is this John Matthew Fox guy anyway? Well, I would say that these are recommendations, first of all, right? I mean, ignore them if you want to. But I will also say that in general, the pacing expectations for stories in this day and age is a lot faster, right? You can't delay for a very long period of time and expect your reader to still be interested in your story because there are so many other competing mediums, right? Your books are competing with video games and with social media and with television and with 1,000 other things. So I think in general, if you can start off with a bang with a certain character, it'll make the reader say, like, I'm invested. Like, I want to go on a journey with this person. The 5th character building technique is how to make your character likable. Now, I will say off the bat, like, characters don't have to be likable. They only have to be compelling. But if if you look at the majority of books that sell a lot of copies, a lot of characters often are likable. So if you have a character that you think should be likable, here's how to accomplish that. And I will say that likable characters doesn't mean flawless character. You don't want Mary Sue's or Gary Stu's or whatever perfect characters that have no flaws whatsoever. Likable characters often have relatable flaws, like the reader sees their own flaws in the character and thinks, oh, that's excusable. Sally Rooney wrote a book called Normal People, and in that book there's a character called Marianne Sheridan. Now, this woman is rich, but also deeply weird and unpopular, but I think her flaws is that she struggles with a sense of self-worth, and she often allows herself to be mistreated in relationships. So with those flaws, we almost sympathize with her more than condemn her for those flaws, because we're like, oh, why are you doing this? But we recognize that flaw makes her into a likable human being. Okay, so here are 4 ways to make your character more likable. 1, give them a strong sense of morality. They should have virtues. They should have standards. They should have values. If you look at John Grady Cole and All the Pretty Horses, he has very firm convictions about what is right and what is wrong. And because of that, we like him a lot as a hero. 2, take care of animals. In A Man Called Uva, we have this curmudgeonly old man, but because he takes care of this cat, we like him, we're endeared to him. And this is what the save the cat technique is named after, right? Heroes have to save the cat, villains have to kick a puppy. How people treat animals tells us a lot about their character. 3rd way to make your characters likable is make them suffer. Offred in The Handmaid's Tale suffers an enormous amount, and we tend to like her a lot because she endures that suffering. And the 4th way to make a character likable is to show competence. Lisbeth Salander in the Millennium series doesn't seem on the surface like a very likable character. She's sort of gruff and abrupt and does some pretty terrible things. But part of the reason we like her is that she's just so dang smart. She's this brilliant hacker and so good at research and maneuvering online. She's also really good at getting revenge. You do not want to be on her bad side. So that level of intelligence makes us like her. So just being wicked smart and just by being intelligent, the reader is going to like her. The 6th technique in character development is give your character an odd habit. So let me tell you a story. So there was this 7-year-old boy who used to tie string around everything. He would tie it around chairs, he would tie it around couches, he would tie it around bookcases, and he even tied it around his sister's neck at one point. No matter what his mother did, she couldn't get him to stop tying strings. Now you could stop there, right? It's certainly an unusual habit. It helps us to get to know this little boy. It creates this mystery, like, why is this kid doing that? And it certainly sets this boy apart from all the other little boys out there. But it would be a mistake to stop there, right? The trick with characterization is seeing why they have that habit. So the boy's mother took him to see a psychoanalyst, and the psychoanalyst told the mother, okay, I figured it out. The little boy's doing this because you, speaking to the mother, have been hospitalized for depression several times and been taken away for multiple weeks. And the boy's trying to tie things down. He's trying to tie string around things to prevent those things from being taken away. He's having abandonment issues. Oh, now the string has significance. Now that tiny little habit becomes like this broader, bigger significance. So my advice is first to come up with some sort of strange habit or tick or thing that your character does. They sleep in the closet, or they use 5 different types of lip balm, or they time the duration of traffic lights and report it to the city. And then once you show them doing this thing, come up with a reason why they would do this thing. And obviously trying to come up with something that bucks the obvious, right? Some sort of unusual reason why they're doing it. Number 7, widen the perception gap. It is a fantastic idea to create distance between how a character sees themselves and how other characters or the reader perceive them. Why does this technique work so well? Well, 1, it enhances readers' engagement. Readers have to weigh the evidence and figure out, okay, is this character telling the truth or are they telling me a slanted version of the truth? There's also story tension because the reader wants to see, is this character's perception of themselves going to be destroyed or changed at some point, or are they going to persist in their delusion? A great example of this is Walter White in Breaking Bad. At the beginning, he constantly tells himself, I'm doing this for family. I'm doing it to provide for my family after I die for cancer. But I think that perception of himself, that lie he tells himself, slowly gets eroded over the course of the season until he comes to recognize, like, no, I did all this drug running for myself, for my own ego. That is a huge character arc in realizing his true motivations. Now, that's a character whose perception of himself changes over the course of a story, story, but you can also have characters whose perceptions are different than everyone else's, but they never change. Look at Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones. I think the way that she perceives herself is as the rightful ruler and a clever strategist. I think everyone else, though, including the readers, perceive her in a vastly different light, as cruel, as bitter, as vindictive, as paranoid, as short-sighted, like just this whole mess of negative descriptions. There was actually tons of people naming their daughter Daenerys. No one was naming their child Cersei. Another example of a big perception gap would be from a confederacy of dunces, right? The dunce in question, Ignatius J. Riley, is this huge man-child, like so immature, idiotic opinions about everything. But how does he perceive himself? Oh, he is a misunderstood genius and cultural critic. I mean, the division gap between his perception and the reality of things could not be broader. The 8th character creation technique is to create foils. What I want you to do is to think about the characters around your character, the ancillary, the supporting characters, stuff like the sidekick, the mentor, the antagonist. And what I mean by foils, basically who your main character is influences those characters, and who those characters are reflects back on your main character. For example, an antagonist is often an inverted version of your protagonist. Think of Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. We have these two opposing characters, Javier and Jean Valjean. Valjean is a former criminal who believes in mercy, while Inspector Javier is this rigid, unyielding policeman who believes firmly in law and order. Some people have said that the inspector, the policeman, is more of an Old Testament version of a character, filled with fire and brimstone and rules like the 10 Commandments and stuff. While Jean Valjean is more of the New Testament version of a human, filled with grace, filled with forgiveness. But those two characters really are opposite sides of a coin. They're not completely divorced from one another, they're mirror images, they're inverted images. For your companion or sidekick, you have to think, what sort of role can they play that complements my main character? For instance, if your main character isn't very funny, then maybe that sidekick character needs to do some comedic relief, like Donkey in the Shrek movies. Or in C.S. Lewis's Narnia series, there's this character called Puddleglum, who is this very funny pessimist, saying stuff like, "The bright side of it is," said Puddleglum, "that if we break our necks getting down the cliff, then we're safe from being drowned in the river." I mean, geez, he's really giving Eeyore a run for his money. Now, for your mentor character, you want to think, how is this character an older version of my protagonist? That establishes a kind of link between them, where they're not completely separate people, they are at different points in their journey, but they're probably more similar than different. Okay, now for the last point, number 9, and I kept this one for the last because it is the most important. Number 9, create a 3-time character. What I mean is that your character needs to exist in at least 3 different time periods: the past, the present, and the future. But I think the verbs are very important here, right? They have to be haunted by the past. Not just have a past, but actually be haunted by it. They have to be wrestling in the present, obviously, right? You need conflict in the present moment. They have to be looking at the future and uncertain how it's going to play out. So first, let's look at haunted by the past. For instance, when it comes to backstory, writers often believe that they need to give information about a character's past. For instance, where did they go to school? Where did they work? Who did they kill? Well, I mean, that last one is only if you're writing a certain genre. But that focus on information can make for a very dull story. No, when I'm talking about the past, I mean your character needs to be haunted by the past. The past needs to be a problem for your character. It needs to be unresolved in some way. In Claire Keegan's book, Small Things Like These, we have a character who is haunted by the identity of his father. He doesn't know who his father is, and that weighs on him through the whole story. So when you're constructing a character's past, you need to go short on information. You can often summarize a whole life in a paragraph. You need to go long on angst, like what does this character struggle with? What are their main problems? And third, the past must spill into the present. The past is only significant in as much as it affects whatever your character is going through in the present moment. Second piece of advice for having your character exist in 3 time periods is obviously the present. And my biggest piece of advice is not to have a singular problem, but at least 2 layers of problem, main problem and a minor problem. In Claire Keegan's book, we discover Bill has 2 problems. One is he discovers nuns have locked this young girl in an unheated tool shed. His second problem is that he's really worried about money and providing for his family. The first is more of an external problem. He is worried about this girl. The second problem is more of an internal problem. He has anxiety about providing for his family. If you have those 2 levels of conflict, your present moment story is off to a great start. Third thing for your characters, they need to be wary of of the future. They should be anticipating the future and be unsure of how it's going to work out. Ask yourself, what is your character anticipating and what are they preparing for? For instance, in Claire Keegan's book, Bill is worried about the future of his 5 daughters. They are all growing up very quickly and they are about to enter, quote, the world of men. So, of course, a man with 5 daughters is going to be worried about that. But once again, the future is only relevant in the way that it affects his present moment story. Because he's worried about his daughter, he doesn't want to offend the nuns by revealing that they're keeping this woman locked in the shed, because he's worried that the nuns will mistreat his own daughters. Because Bill is worried about his own daughter's future, he doesn't want to get on the nuns' backside because the nuns have such enormous sway inside the community. All right, I hope that was all helpful, and check out the link in the description if you'd like to take some writing courses with me.